Hello, everyone. Today with us, we have Shreya Paropkari, who is the Senior Manager, Farm Animal Protection and Cruelty Response of Humane Society India. She's an animal advocate who advocates for policy change, capacity building of law enforcement and judiciary to get rid of animal cruelty. She also teaches animal protection law as part of the Ahimsa Fellowship, which she runs. It is the first fellowship that seeks to train selected fellows from across the country in the legal and policy regime to bring about better animal protection. I thought there was no better way to start off by asking you if you had to describe the state of animal law in India in one sentence, what would that be?
I can do it in one word: inertia. I think we are leaps and bounds ahead of many countries in how our law is structured and just how much legislation there is for animal welfare in this country, either directly made for the purpose of animal welfare or because environment protection laws and several other laws that benefit animal welfare. It is the execution that's the problem and not the laws itself.
Yeah, and why do laws like duty to have compassion for all living creatures exist in the Indian Constitution? I know that in many countries like the US, it isn't explicitly recognized, but what is the history of India that has led to it being included?
Well, our culture has certain bedrocks, Ahimsa being one of them. And we've lived with animals for as far back as civilization can be traced. But specifically about the duty to have the duty to be compassionate to all creatures, that was something that was brought in by the 42nd Amendment to the Constitution in 1976. That amendment brought in several changes, many changes. Among those was the duty, fundamental duties, as well as one directive, principle of state policy, 48A, which makes it incumbent upon the state to protect wildlife and the environment. Why that would have been done, maybe we have to go back to the constitutional archives to see what the debates were about. But there was, in that time period, recognition of how important the environment is, how important wildlife is, and that we need to protect our forests, which until then were just treasury most. The gift of colonialism was to treat forests as a treasure and not see the benefit in protecting it, so on and so forth. So that was around the time also that the Wildlife Protection Act came into being. And so I just believe there was a recognition that we need to protect the environment, whether it was for our benefit or for the benefit of the animals, that's debatable.
So you mentioned there existing inertia, but why do we still struggle to see laws being passed that mandate rigorous standards of animal welfare and harsh penalties? Is it the lack of legislation in the form of statutes to uphold some of these constitutional principles?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, we are leaps and bounds ahead of many countries. The Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act was enacted specifically for the purpose of preventing cruelty to animals. Yes, it's dated, but as a legislation, it's excellent. It was futuristic even then. It covered everything. That the penalties are dated is another thing. That it needs to be updated is another thing. And there is, it is being amended. There was a bill circulated. Public comments have been sought. There were stakeholder meetings by the nodal department and everything. So I believe that we are close to an amendment. Why it took so long? Yeah, inertia. I mean, the PC Act it's not the state governments, it's a central legislation. So it's the parliament that has to amend it. Despite several parliamentarians having supported it, I think we got signatures from more than 140 members of parliaments supporting the amendment. There are several industries built on the back of animal exploitation. And so there is always some amount of resistance, but I think we're close to an amendment.
Yeah, and one of the things that really struck me was that one of the biggest issues is also the existence of many slaughterhouses that aren't registered in the first place. So why are there so many slaughterhouses that are just not under the, under registration from the government?
Right. That's a tough question to answer. I mean, regulation exists. No business wants to be regulated, because being regulated means having certain standards. And there's a pick of excuses as to why. There's regulation of these kind of industries is always, of course, difficult, because then it's seen as an attack on your choice of food and culture and employment and so many other things. But those are all just excuses. It's not that the claims that there are groups and communities and sections of people that are affected by it, they are anyway affected by it. These are the communities and sections of people that are anyway on the losing end of it. It's not that it gives them any economic benefit. It's still the handful of industries that benefit from these businesses. India, like other countries, does not have cattle reared for meat and then cattle reared for milch purposes. It is the milch cattle that end up in slaughterhouses. So as long as there is a dairy industry, the slaughter houses will continue to thrive. There is, again, excellent legislation to regulate slaughterhouses, and that jurisprudence is something that has grown over the years. There's, of course, the slaughterhouse rules, but once the Food Safety and Standards Act came into being and there were regulations under it, there are several standards for the purpose. Again, this was not for the purpose of animal welfare, but animals would benefit from this regulation because it's about food safety and public health. So the standard of care to be given to an animal which is meant to be consumed is established in that law. So that benefits animal welfare. Why there are unregistered slaughterhouses is, like I said, that nobody wants to be regulated. And that's fine.
Yeah, and are there any other loopholes in the law that companies try to exploit, and what should we do as a result to like fill in those loopholes?
If you're asking particularly about slaughterhouses, there are no loopholes. I mean, the food safety laws, the slaughterhouse regulations are excellent. There's, like I said, the jurisprudence has expanded. There have been several litigations in which the Supreme Court also put together directions saying there should be monitoring committees. So it's not sufficient to have law, but that it's being implemented, that it's being executed. There has to be some monitoring and evaluation. So there's supposed to be a state-level slaughterhouse monitoring committee that assesses, gives approval for slaughterhouse to be constructed if there are proposals, what standards and inspections and so on and so forth. Again, these are multi-stakeholder committees that are to be set up at the state government level. Some states have notified them, several haven't. So again, it's some amount of inertia at the execution level that's keeping from effective implementation. What we can do is, any law is as good as it is if it is put to use, and everybody is in a position to help. You don't have to be a lawyer, you don't have to be anybody really, you just have to be aware and compassionate, and you can report it to the appropriate authority. All the answers are one Google search away.
Yeah, I want to pick up on reporting to authorities. So how does this currently work? So does the Animal Welfare Board of India conduct raids, or do people file PILs? I know that people file PILs as opposed to FIRs, but is there any significance in that?
Oh, great amount of significance. I mean, AWBI is not a law enforcement agency. It's a statutory body that was established under the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act. Its primary function is to advise the government of India on improving and implementing policies pertaining to animal welfare to prevent animal cruelty. And it is also a regulatory body and licensing and registration body for performing animals, for pet shops and dog breeding and marketing. So it can't it can't conduct raids. It can conduct inspections in situations where they are the licensing and registration authority to ensure compliance, but not conduct raids. The reporting structure is, I mean, PIL is a public interest litigation. It's approaching the court for getting a certain direction for a government agency to do or not do something. So that is for more systemic changes, reporting instances of cruelty, reporting violation of law. That's not where PIL comes in. That's where the FIRs come in, or non-cognizable reports, depending on whether it's a cognizable, non-cognizable offense. So this is about 2 semesters worth of law school for me answering that question, but it's, you just have to identify which authority is responsible for enforcement of whichever law you believe is violated, and you have to report it, and then you write into that authority. It's not as simple as it sounds. It requires understanding what the rights of the animals are, what the duties of the enforcement agency or the whichever nodal department or agency it is, what their responsibility is, and following up to make sure that they do their duty where you think they've failed.
Yeah, and I also know that you also work in police sensitization programs, but what role does this have in stopping animal cruelty?
So most activists, compassionate individuals with all the good intent in their heart, when they approach police stations and for reporting any kind of cruelty, when the effect is not instant, when the response is not instantaneous, they're very dejected, and they believe this is some special negligence for animals, but that's not true. Our police is overburdened. We are a country with many laws. We have the longest written constitution, and we have thousands of legislations. So our police is overburdened. So sensitizing them to what animal protection laws are and what to do in situations where they are used to, like I said, a law is as good as the use that it's put to. So if a lot of these reports are not going to the police and they don't have the experience of dealing with these cases, when the 1 or 2 odd cases come in, it's not handled procedurally, because the procedure for animal cruelty is different from the procedure in other existing law, whether it's the Indian Penal Code or whatever else. So the sensitization workshop help us establish to the police, draw that link as to why it's essential to respond to animal cruelty, not just in the interest of animal welfare. That's priority for us, but also in the larger interest of the society, because the link between animal cruelty and human violence has been established, right? There's enough and more literature that points to that. So it's also in the larger interest of the society for them to intervene and prevent and prosecute instances of animal cruelty. It also helps us bring them up to date with laws, and animal protection laws have been, in the recent past, at least in my time in the policy realm, in the public policy realm, there have been a lot of updates. A lot of laws that came into existence, and a lot of laws that have been amended and improved. So that sensitization to why it's important and what the changes are, so we can bring them up to date, makes all of the difference. I remember when I went to a police station a decade and a half ago, probably, when I was still in school, because I saw somebody beating a dog, and I mentioned that it's, they need to do something. I don't know FIR procedures and none of that. They said you have to do something. They said, oh, well, it's their dog. They can do whatever they want. I said, no, there's a Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act. And the police was convinced that it was something that I was making up, that such a law couldn't possibly exist. So that just means that they were not faced with these situations before. But now I walk into a police station, everybody knows what the PCA Act is, the transport rules, the dog breeding, the pet shop, this, that, and the other, because they're being put to use, because they are faced with those situations, because we're doing sensitization workshops. So there are precedents that we talk to them about and procedures and everything. So that's been a wonderful shift to witness. I'm not saying it's perfect. I think it's a continuous learning for anybody. So, yeah.
Yeah, I definitely think that police sensitization must have a really, big role in actually being able to enforce animal cruelty, even though it seems very challenging, and it probably will be, despite the fact that India does have very pro-animal welfare laws. So I wanted to move on to litigating animal law in India. So what was the Animal Welfare Board of India versus Nagaraja case all about? And are there any other cases that have benefited from the legal precedent that it set?
It really is the Magna Carta of animal rights in my mind, and I use the term rights very lightly, but it was truly litigated on animal welfare directly. I think everything from interpreting the law as it stands to recognizing the 5 freedoms for animals, and extending the purview of sections 3 and 11 of the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act. Section 3 of the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act talks about duty of care. Every person having charge of an animal has a duty to ensure that the well-being of that animal. And Section 11 has all of these actions or omissions that amount to cruelty. So the Supreme Court observed that the 5 freedoms of animals find place between this written law. So these are freedoms that are already accorded to animals by the existing legislation in the country. That was a very significant observation. And comparing that, likening that with the fundamental rights we enjoy as citizens of India, the right to life, and saying that, making observations that say that the dignity of animals is essential, and that the worth of animals is more than the value that they hold for us, whether as whatever we use them for, food, work, research, whatever else, that they have a worth and a dignity beyond that value that they hold for us. So there were several important observations, but essentially the case was about Jallikattu, which is a horrible and extremely cruel and violent activity that is carried out in the state of Tamil Nadu. There are some different types that are carried out, but the most popular one is where the bull is confined to a small area, agitated by using irritants in their orifices, and prodded, forced with alcohol, so on and so forth, and then released into a screaming horde of humans who all attempt to jump on the back of the bull. The bull is already terrified. It's not a horse, so it doesn't just run. It runs when it is scared. So the bull is supposed to run through thousands of people who are trying to hop on it, and there are so many casualties every Jallikattu, human and animal. So the question before the court was whether this activity, which I refuse to call sport, this activity is it allowed is it cruelty under the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act? Because the state of Tamil Nadu had attempted to regulate it, but you can't regulate something like that, that it is, the cruelty is intrinsic. So you cannot regulate. There's no way in which you can prevent cruelty by regulating it. Fear is the element that is essential for this activity, fear in the animal. So the attempt was to regulate it, and it was a terrible piece of regulation. It was completely unimplementable. So that was what was challenged before the Supreme Court. And the litigation itself is very fascinating, very lengthy, but very fascinating from start to finish. There were attempts to, after regulating it, there was attempt to again give it an exemption and allow it by recognizing bulls as, I mean, bulls were already a part of a notification where they were among the list of animals that cannot be used for performances. Animal performances are allowed to a certain extent by a certain standard, by the performing animal rules, but there are some animals that cannot be utilized no matter what. They don't get license for performance, and bulls were one of those animals. So it was attempted to create an exception that, sure, they're not performing animals, but they can be used for bullock cart races, jallikattu, so on and so forth. That again was challenged in 2016, and that again was set aside. So then to get around that, the state of Tamil Nadu made an amendment to the act itself. Instead of creating a separate regulation, which already had not worked, there was an amendment to the act. That was challenged, of course. It was recently, this year, heard by the Constitutional Bench. All of these very important questions were before the Supreme Court, and it's been heard. We are expecting the judgment soon, so we will know. But it was a very important piece of judgment. And yes, there were several cases that did benefit from it. The cockfight matter here in the Hyderabad High Court, other races and bullock cart races and so many others were impacted by it. So I hope that the constitutional values are upheld and the existing laws allowed to be executed, because as the Supreme Court very observed in the Jallikattu judgment, culture and tradition is secondary to a welfare legislation.
So you talked about animal dignity. So how did this judgment define animal rights when it was in contention with human rights or their considerations? So you did mention the example of culture, but was there anything more than that?
Yes, the Supreme Court also examined what is now called the doctrine of necessity, because the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act, again, has certain exemption. It doesn't absolutely protect animals. It's to prevent unnecessary pain and suffering, indicating that there is some amount of pain and suffering that may be necessary. And those exemptions are drawn out in Section 11(3) of the Act. But even in those exemptions, those two are not absolute. There are certain prescribed standards that have to be followed, and it still has to be with the consideration that the infliction of pain and suffering is minimized or avoided. Food for mankind is an exemption. So what amounts to cruelty is not applicable in cases where animals are being prepared for the purpose of food for mankind. However, that preparation and destruction should be accompanied by the prevention of cruelty. That's why there are standards, that's why there are slaughterhouse and so on and so forth. So that doctrine of necessity was examined to say what really is necessary and what can be avoided. And obviously something like Jallikattu is very, very avoidable, considering that it's a waste of public resources. It results in so many unbelievable number of casualties, and the other social complexities of that event are best left for people with more understanding of that. But there is a whole lot of class and caste discriminations and everything that are woven into that event.
Yeah, and that explains why we've seen more success in litigating cases of, Jellicoe and just bullfighting and cockfighting, but like less success in, factory farm abuses and stuff like that. I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the other acts that are in the Constitution. So we've got the Air Act of 1981, the Water Act of 1947, the food and safety laws that could potentially help in bringing a lawsuit against factory farms because they do, emit a lot of toxic waste that could also harm humans. But a lot of these laws are defined in a very anthropocentric manner, in that they are intended for humans. So what extent do you think that these laws can actually help animals are?
They do already help animals. Yes, they're anthropocentric. I mean, the Environment Protection Act and the Air Act and the Water Act are for the purpose of protecting the environment, because we live in the environment, yes. But it's connected, right? Factory farms create pollutions, affect public health, affect the environment, so on and so forth. So while these are not laws specifically recognizing animal welfare, they don't need to, because their purpose is to protect the environment or protect public health in case of food safety laws. There are laws that protect animal welfare, like the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act. So that's fine, but they do have a benefit on animal welfare. It is because of the structures of the industry of factory farms that by nature they're so polluting, and so they have to be regulated. So that's it. It doesn't prevent the effect of regulating those industries, the effect of these laws that they have on the animal welfare. So that's all right that they're not particularly saying, hey, factory farms are horrible, so we need to shut them down, but it's about the pollution. So that's fine because they still benefit animal welfare and they're being used to that effect.
Yeah, and I think one example could just be the heavy confinement of animals also leads to an increase in the spread of diseases. So I think H1N1 flu, for example. So if there could be like cases that are brought up against factory farms that practice some of these really cruel methods of confinement, potentially that could also lead to trickle-down benefits for animal safety as well. So I also wanted to ask another question about the investigations into these factory farms themselves. So in the West, for example, a lot of outrage was the result of a lot of these undercover investigations that have happened. However, in the West, they were also severely limited due to ag-gag laws that like prevent undercover investigations from happening. Do these laws also exist in India?
No ag-gag laws. Of course, there's laws, criminal laws that prevent trespassing, and there's a right to privacy, so on and so forth. But there's also a duty on citizens of India to ensure if there is a crime, if there is a violation of law, that we report it. So there's no ag-gag laws in India, but I encourage everybody who wants to visit or photograph or record anything on factory farm to please do so sensibly, because you can still be sued for trespass, so long as nobody's making up any lies and walking into private areas, then it's fine.
Yeah, so
walking not advisable.
Yeah, so on this, if somebody does get charged for trespassing, but they also find evidence of cruelty against animals. How does that work? So do charges get pressed on both parties, or are they like picked? Does one party get the precedent over the other? I think you're muted.
Right. There, now it's complete. It's essential for somebody to say that on Zoom. It depends on what law, what the law enforcement agency is. If you're asking if they sue me for trespass while I sue them for cruelty, there's no precedence that if FIRs get registered, they have to be investigated, and whatever police report is filed at the end of the investigation. It's not, there's no precedence, there's no first come, first serve anything. If you establish that there was an offense and it's a cognizable offense, an FIR must be registered. The police is bound to register an FIR when they're informed of a cognizable offense. No precedence as such. But if you're asking what the process is for reporting cruelty on a factory farm, it's the same as reporting any type of cruelty. If you're reporting cruelty under the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act, then it's being able to convince the police that this is an offense and an FIR is to be registered. You just have to know which provisions of law are applicable. But because of how expansive factory farms are, how it's big industry, I think it would be foolish to go to each factory farm and FIR registered and so on. And that's why, because it's in the larger interest, because the larger section of stakeholders, that's where the public interest litigation comes in.
Yeah, and what, according to you, is the biggest challenge in litigating for animals in India? So how many cases do you file? Do you hear back? Is there success in some of these cases?
Yeah, yeah. How many cases do I can't answer that, but we have over 100 matters ongoing across almost every high court in the country, and those are just public interest litigations. There's many matters in the lower courts, which are the reports, the FIRs that have matured to go to court. I don't have a count on that. So many matters, and yes, there is success. There's a lot of policies that have come in recently are results of litigation that questioned the policy making, the departments, the nodal agencies, which resulted in directions that encouraged the policymakers to respond with improving policy or introducing policy where there was a lacuna. So yes, there is success. It is a time-consuming process. Nothing is overnight. There is a lot that goes into strategy before we go to litigate. It's very important that litigation is not a knee-jerk reaction. It is thought out because we have to map what benefits this can have, or if there are any pitfalls, and whether we are improving the status of animal welfare by doing this, or are we negatively impacting it. So litigation for us is never knee-jerk reaction.
So I want to pick on this point you just made on the laws themselves, whether we should litigate, and deciding if doing so is good for animals. By talking about how does the Animal Welfare Board of India decide what considerations it wants to pass. So recently it issued an order to phase out battery cages. So is there any decision making that happens? How do they come to these kinds of decisions?
So the board the constitution of the board is also in the act. The board is comprised of officers of the government, of individuals and representatives of organizations, civil society, and so forth. So collective decisions. It didn't pass an order. It was a advisory. Because again, in furtherance of its statutory duty to advise the government on improving animal welfare laws, that advisory came in 2012, actually, and soon followed a set of rules that they recommended, draft rules that they recommended to the government of India, because the housing standards, the rearing standards of hens are not provided for, they're not regulated, largely an unregulated industry and hence profitable. So that advisory came in 2012, followed by a set of rules that were recommended. Sadly, those rules were not considered. But in 2017, the Law Commission of India, which is the Government of India's legal reform advisory body, which is chaired by ex-judges of the higher courts, and has on its board serving members of the law ministry, secretaries of the law ministry. The Law Commission also in 2017 took those set of rules that the Animal Welfare Board of India recommended for regulating standards for egg-laying hens, the housing standards for egg-laying hens, made minor improvements, and again recommended. So all of the expert bodies on legal reform, specifically on animals and legal reform otherwise, recommended the phase out of battery cages because of the detrimental effect they have on animal welfare, on public health and environment. But unfortunately, those rules were not considered. The Government of India did come up with some rules this year, which are completely contrary to the act under which they are notified. They're contrary to the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act. And they're contrary to all of the recommendations and advice of the expert bodies. This again, of course, is motivated by the egg industry, unfortunately. That matter is still ongoing. We're before the Delhi High Court. But again, this litigation started with the AWBI advisory and us asking for that advisory to be implemented. Yeah. Was that your question?
Yeah, it was. Thank you for answering. That was very comprehensive. So my next question is, has the criminalization of cow slaughter made it worse for cow welfare? Because India still remains the world's largest beef exporter. So presumably these slaughterhouses have gone underground, where it's even harder to, find out or uncover any abuses that might be going on there.
See, like I said, the dairy industry is the supplier. So as long as we're going to be in the top 3 of milk and milk products, exporting and producing and whatever, we're always going to continue having cattle. What do you do with all of those cattle that you use? So I think the focus is on the symptom when it comes to cow slaughter, rather than on the root cause. So if the solution is more oriented towards the root cause, it might have more effect than a solution that attempts to address just one of the symptoms. So I think shifting that focus might give us the answer.
Yeah, I think that one of the difficulties, at least in India, is that dairy consumption is just one of the highest in the world. Even though we have the most number of vegetarians, I think a lot of people just do consume dairy. So it just seems really difficult to imagine in India where people are, consuming milk. But I just think that, potentially if we could find a way to actually bring a lot of these slaughterhouses into the legal system, there could be scope for making sure that the worst abuses aren't committed. I wanted to talk a bit about animal law education in India. So I'm alarmed by the FIAPA report that cites that there have been 20,000 cases of heinous crimes against animals in the last 10 years. And these are just atrocious acts like blowing up stray animals with firecrackers and even lighting bonfires and sticking a rod down one of them to kill the animal. I think that as a lawyer, it must be very difficult to hold back the emotion, and it's really depressing having to see these cases in the first place. So how should a lawyer be, keep going when these cases are this distressing?
You ask very tough questions, Karthik. It is distressing, and I think the 20,000 figures, just something that FIAPA was able to put together, talking to other organizations, and I don't think that it's 20,000. I think it's much more. The numbers whittled down because of the fact that only a portion of cruelty instances are reported, and none of it is recorded. So there is no the records of crime don't include crimes against animals. So that's unfortunate. So we don't know the real extent of it. It is distressing. I mean, everything from the cases that you were talking about, firecrackers and tossing animals and stoning and the cases of bestiality. They're all very distressing. I can't speak for how advocates for animal welfare or animal rights, I can't speak for everybody as to how they carry on. But for me, the trauma to us, the distress to us is a fraction of, and it's secondhand, a fraction of what the animals face. Whether it's hens in battery cages, overcrowded, with such little space that they have to sit on top of each other. They can't spread their wings, and they're not even considered birds, really. We forget that they're birds, that they need to nest and lay eggs and brood and spread their wings and perch. None of those opportunities are available to hens in battery cages. Cattle, social animals, for them to be constantly confined, tied, to be separated from their offspring. All of that is, the secondhand trauma that we have from that is just insignificant. It's invisible, really. So me feeling bad and being sad about it and maybe holding up and crying is not going to help animals in any way. So that really is how I keep going. I'm not saying that I minimize the effect that it has on me, but I recognize that it is nothing in comparison. And so.
Yeah, and you also teach animal law. So how have students' attitudes changed as a result of the instruction provided? I ask because there are some policy proposals in Chennai to include animal welfare as part of the school curriculum as a way to promote compassion, because as you pointed out, there is a very high correlation between cases of domestic abuse or just violence as well as animal abuse. So do you think that something like this might actually help that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I think nobody is born with murder in their hearts. They don't want to. They're not just born saying, "I want to pick up a stone and throw it at a dog today." That doesn't happen. Children don't naturally just. They aren't cruel. Situations and circumstances might make them. A combination or individually, psychological factors and all of that. Hence, all of that literature about the link between animal abuse and human cruelty. It could be that a child that's exposed to violence then perpetuates that violence and then graduates in terms of that violence when they're perpetuating it. So I think it helps to have this in education, the education system, just to remind ourselves of the compassion that's already in us. Not because it births anything, but because it rekindles our senses.
Yeah, and what is the Ahimsa Fellowship and who should sign up for it?
The Ahimsa Fellowship is a program that's run by People for Animals Uttarakhand in partnership with several other organizations. ahimsafellowship.org. All of the information is on the website, but it's a wonderful program. And I wish when I was starting out, there was something like that that could have helped build my capacity, that would have given me access to incredible people that have done incredible things for me to learn from them and grow. But that opportunity is now. It's a 9-month fellowship. The idea is to build the capacity of individuals that are already working towards animal welfare in their regions, and to just enable them to have a larger impact by making systemic changes. So the application for the third cohort has already been announced. I think it's for those who have a commitment to animal welfare. It's probably not for beginners. It's more of an advanced capacity building workshop. So if you are working towards animal welfare in your own region and you want to do more and you want to do better, then you sign up to the fellowship. There are career opportunities. So this might be how you shift gears to make your career in the animal welfare movement, because we have a fabulous 100% recruitment rate so far. And we're partnered with the best organizations across the country, who are all looking for talent to do more in what they already do in their campaigns and their advocacy. So it's a wonderful program. Please check out the website and sign up.
Yeah, so we discussed a lot about animal law in India, but I wanted to move on to a few questions about you. So what got you interested in animal welfare and why did you want to become an advocate for animals?
I know I've always, my mother, my mother's mother, we've always had animals around us. And my mother always said, be kinder than necessary. I didn't really understand what that meant until I was much older. But I don't know, it was just something we did. There were animals on the street. We made sure that they were all right. When we learned that they need to be vaccinated, we found out where we can get them vaccinated. And it just graduated from there. We see an injured animal and we bring it to the vet clinic. Then we understand that there are all of these animals that need help and are homeless. And then we learned about shelters, and then we started volunteering at shelters. Then we learned that there is a need for volunteers outside to help animals, that all animals can't be brought to the shelter. And so started the rescue and the foster work. And that's how it was until I went for a master trainers program in 2013, organized by HSI India at Nalsar, for master trainers on animal protection laws. And I discovered that there was a whole world of animals that I hadn't considered in my years of volunteering, which were farmed animals. And so the graduation to the focus to farmed animals. So it was just exposure.
Absolutely. And what does a typical day in the life look like for you?
There is no typical day. One day does not look like the other. Um, I mean, there's the variety of work that organizations and advocates undertake to improve welfare is very vast. As in, it's whatever skill you have, we have a use for you. You're right. We want you to write for us and talk about the work and sensitize people. You're a teacher, we can use those skills. You are an engineer, we can use those skills. There's anything that you have, any skill that you have can be utilized in the movement. I believe everybody has the capacity to help animals. I mean, the best thing you can do to help animals is to not eat them. So every time you sit down to eat, you can make the choice to not eat animal products, and so you help animals. It's that simple to help animals, and that's just the starting point. And of course, you can graduate to doing more and more. So there's no typical day. There's litigation. It could be court. It could be advocating for animals in offices of in government offices. It could be sensitization workshops. So there's no typical day. It's everything and anything that we can do.
Yeah. What's the best part of your job and the hardest?
The best and the hardest are both the same, actually, and it's all of the job. It's uh, it's the hardest is seeing the cruelty. Can't turn away from it. On an individual level, it's frustrating. It's that, well, I don't eat animals. I don't need to see more of this because I'm avoiding eating them because I know what they go through. But it's essential for us to see it so we can talk about it to other people. But telling people, affecting change is the best part. It's also the hardest because you have to expose yourself to be able to affect change.
Yeah. And do you have any advice for people who are aspiring to be animal lawyers in India?
Um, don't eat animals or animal products. That's one. It's I think very hard to have to represent them when you eat them. I can't quite wrap my head around how that might work. But there is more opportunity today, and there'll probably be more opportunity tomorrow than there was yesterday or a decade ago. Whether it is the fellowship or the courses, whether credit courses or diploma courses, and now MA in animal law that are being offered across the top law schools in the country. There is just so much opportunity. What it took me when I started out was years of having to learn on the go. You could learn in a couple of months of time and affect it. So my advice is to take advantage of all of the opportunities available today, make the best of it, and represent animals, because it's not just an opportunity to learn and grow, but it's also an opportunity to make a career uh, out of it.
Yeah. And yeah, do you have anything else to say about this?
This is what it is to be able to love what you do. That's
Yeah. Is there anything that we haven't covered so far that you'd like to mention? Anything you wish you were asked?
I can't think of anything. I think you had very pertinent questions, and I hope I was able to answer them all. And I hope that those who are watching uh, find benefit. Maybe there's some people that are redirected to the Ahimsa Fellowship, or maybe there's somebody who wants to make a career in the movement. I'm always happy to do my bit and pass on the little information that I have and any guidance I can provide. So reach out to me if you want to lawyer for animals.
Yeah, thank you so much, Shreya, for all of those insights. I truly admire your work as an animal lawyer and all of the work you do for animal protection. You do a lot, and thank you so much for all you do for animals. I cannot wait to see the policy change that your work will bring about to end animal cruelty.
Thank you, Karthik.